There are conversations from which you walk away feeling like nothing was said, not because there was nothing to talk about, not because there wasn't enough time, but because everything that was shared seemed to inhabit a layer of reality where you can no longer be. The room was full. There was laughter, glasses being filled, stories being told with enthusiasm. Someone was talking about the promotion that had finally come. Someone else was complaining about traffic but was already making plans for the weekend. There was human warmth. There was presence. And yet she was completely absent. Not by choice, not out of arrogance, but because something inside her had changed irreversibly, and now every sentence she heard seemed to echo in a void she couldn't name. The words reached her ears but found no place to land. It was like watching a movie without subtitles in a language you once spoke fluently, but now sounds foreign. She tried to smile at the right moments. She tried to nod when they expected her to nod. But there was an insurmountable distance between her and everyone else, and that distance was not in physical space. It was in the way she saw the world. It was in the impossibility of returning to an innocence that, without her realizing it, had been dissolved by questions that never stopped growing. And the most disturbing thing was not being there, out of place. It was realizing that no one else noticed, that for everyone else that was enough, that those conversations, those plans, those automatic certainties about what matters and what doesn't, all of that was enough. And it really was enough. It wasn't pretense. It was genuine. But for her, something had broken. And now she could no longer inhabit that place without feeling that she was betraying something deep within herself. She left early. She made up some excuse. No one insisted too much. On the way back, the silence in the car brought no relief, because the discomfort wasn't in the other people. It was in the clear realization that she had crossed an invisible line, and on the other side, loneliness was inevitable. Perhaps you recognize this feeling, not necessarily in this scene, but in the emotional structure it carries. The feeling that something has changed in the way you perceive life, and now the conversations, values, and priorities that once made sense seem insufficient, or distant, or empty of a density you cannot ignore. This is not depression, it is not cynicism, and it is definitely not superiority. It is something else, something quieter and more devastating. It is the cost of having seen something that cannot be unseen, of having asked questions that no longer allow for automatic answers, of having crossed a threshold of consciousness that makes it impossible to go back to living on autopilot with comfortable narratives. And the loneliest part of it all is realizing that most people will never understand, not because they are less intelligent, not because they are superficial, but because they simply haven't reached that fissure. And maybe they never will, and maybe that's even better for them. But for those who have arrived, there is no map back. There is no way to unlearn what has been learned. There is no way to close your eyes and go back to believing that the shadows cast on the wall are the only possible reality, because that's what we're talking about. Plato's allegory of the cave, not as an academic exercise, but as an accurate existential diagnosis of a specific type of isolation. The isolation of those who left, of those who saw the light, and now can no longer pretend that the chains were comfortable. That is the price, and no one warns you that it is irreversible. The story Plato tells is not about philosophy. It is about you, about the exact moment when something inside you began to crack and there is no way to fix it. Imagine a deep cave, so deep that it has never seen the light of day. Inside it, people chained since birth facing a stone wall. Behind them, a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners, objects being moved casting shadows on the wall. And these shadows, just shadows, are all these people know as reality. They don't know they're trapped. They don't know there are chains. For them, the shadows are the totality of what exists. They give names to the shapes they see. They create narratives about the movements. They develop theories about which shadow comes after which. And if someone is particularly good at predicting the behavior of the shadows, they are considered wise, successful, someone who understands how the world works. Then something happens. One of the prisoners is freed, not by choice, not by merit. The chains simply come loose. He stands up, confused, disoriented. He turns around for the first time and he sees the fire. The light burns his eyes. It hurts. It is uncomfortable. He wants to go back to the shadows because the shadows didn't hurt. But something has already changed. Because now he has seen that the shadows are not reality. They are projections, reflections of something bigger that was happening behind his back the whole time. And that vision, that single vision, makes it impossible to look at the wall the same way again. He's dragged out of the cave, against his will. The sunlight is unbearable. He has to close his eyes. When he finally manages to open them, he sees trees, mountains, the sky, things he never imagined existed. And he realizes with brutal clarity that he has spent his entire life looking at reflections of reflections, that everything he knew was an impoverished, distorted, two-dimensional version of something infinitely more complex. This is the allegory of the cave, but it is not a metaphor about education or academic knowledge. It is a surgical diagnosis of what happens when you begin to question the automatic narratives that sustain modern life. When you realize that what everyone calls reality is in fact a comfortable consensus on limited interpretations. An awakening is rarely a choice. It is a crack. It starts small. An inconvenient question. An uneasiness that has no name. The feeling that something doesn't add up even if you don't know what. It could be anything. A moment of silence when you realize you're following a script you never chose. A conversation that reveals that the people around you have never questioned why they live the way they do. A loss that exposes the fragility of certainties that seem solid. The crack grows, because once you see that there is a question, you can no longer ignore it. And every answer you find generates 3 new questions. And every layer you remove reveals another layer beneath. Until you realize that you are no longer looking at the same shadows that everyone else is looking at. You've turned your head, and now you see the bonfire. And that changes everything. Because the conversations that used to make sense now seem like discussions about shadows. The concerns that dominate people's lives. The new car, the promotion, validation on social media, the next travel destination. All of that starts to seem a small. Not because you've become superior, but because you've seen that there's a dimension of existence that doesn't fit into those categories. The problem is not that other people are wrong. The problem is that they are still looking at the wall. And for those who are still looking at the wall, the shadows are everything. They are real. They are important. They are enough. And trying to explain that there is something beyond the shadows sounds absurd. It sounds like madness, or like the arrogance of someone who thinks they are above others. But it is not arrogance. It is cognitive isolation. It is the impossibility of sharing a perception that cannot be translated into the language of shadows. Plato knew this 2,400 years ago. He knew that awakening is not a gift. It is a rupture. And that this rupture condemns the person to a specific type of loneliness. Not the loneliness of those who are physically alone, but the loneliness of those who see something that others cannot see. And worse, of those who can no longer not see. Because that is what makes it irreversible. It is not that you have learned something new. It is that your perception has changed. You have not acquired information. You have expanded the way you process reality. And there is no undo button for that. There is no going back to the innocence of thinking that shadows are all there is. And maybe you have never read Plato. Maybe you've never set foot in a philosophy classroom, but you recognize the feeling. You recognize the moment when something inside you broke free from its chains. The moment when you looked around and realized you were following a script that never really made sense. That you were fulfilling expectations you never questioned. That you were measuring success by metrics someone else invented and you simply accepted. That's the beginning, the first crack in the shadow. And the scariest thing isn't what you saw. It's realizing that you can't go back, that the cave door is open. And that on the other side, the light is so intense that it hurts your eyes. But closing your eyes now would be pretending. It would be betraying yourself. And you know you can't do that. Not honestly. Not without losing yourself completely. So you leave. Not because you want to, but because you have no choice. There is a powerful temptation. After seeing what lies beyond the shadows, after feeling the light burning your eyes, there is an almost desperate urge to go back. To climb back down into the cave. To sit among the prisoners again and pretend that the chain still makes sense, because inside at least you had company. Inside the conversations flowed. People laughed at the same jokes. They shared the same concerns. There was a sense of belonging so automatic that you never had to think about it. You were simply included. You were simply part of it. And now outside you are alone. The light is bright. Reality is more complex, more vast, more true. But it is lonely in a way that hurts in a place you didn't know existed. So you think, maybe I can go back. Maybe I can relearn to look only at the shadows. Maybe I can forget what I saw. But you can't. And that is the cruelest truth of the allegory of the cave. The part that Plato makes painfully clear, but that most people ignore when they read the story for the first time. Once you leave, once you see, there is no going back. Not because anyone is stopping you, but because you can no longer deceive yourself. You try. You go back to the conversations that used to fill your time. You try to be interested in the same things that interested everyone else. You try to laugh at the right moment. You try to feel the urgency that others feel about promotions, status, social validation. You try to believe that it matters the way everyone says it matters. But now you see the structure behind it. You see the invisible chains. You see that people are stuck in narratives they never questioned. Not because they are stupid, but because they never needed to question them, because the shadows were enough, because the cave was all they knew, and within those limits life made sense. And you can no longer inhabit that space without feeling that you are betraying something fundamental. You can no longer participate in conversations without a part of you observing from the outside, realizing how much of it is constructed, conditioned, automated, not necessarily false, but incomplete in a way that can no longer be ignored. This is not superiority. It is mourning. It is the irreversible loss of the ability to live on autopilot, the loss of innocence that allowed you to accept ready-made answers without feeling the weight of unasked questions. And mourning hurts, because what you lost was no small thing. It was ease, lightness, the possibility of simply existing without questioning existence all the time. Kierkegaard called this the anguish of freedom. He realized that consciousness is not liberating in the comfortable sense that the word suggests. It is liberating in the sense that you are now condemned to choose. At every moment, in every conversation, in every decision. You can no longer go with the flow without realizing that you are going with the flow. You can no longer accept narratives without noticing that they are narratives. And that is exhausting. It is lonely. It is the opposite of what self-help books promise about waking up and finding your true self. Because the true self, when found, often discovers that it is out of place, that it no longer fits into automatic conversations, that it can no longer feign enthusiasm for things that once seemed important. And there is no manual for dealing with this. There is no support group for people who have seen beyond the shadows and now don't know how to live again among those who still believe that shadows are everything. You try to explain. You try to find words that translate what you have seen. But how do you describe sunlight to those who only know shadows? How do you explain that there is a dimension of reality that does not fit into the categories that everyone uses? Words fail, not because you are not eloquent, but because the language that everyone shares was created inside the cave. It was made to describe shadows. And you are trying to use that language to talk about something that only exists outside. So you give up. Not dramatically, not angrily. You just give up. You stop trying to explain. You stop expecting anyone to understand. And at that moment, loneliness solidifies. Because now it's not just that you're out of place. It's that you've accepted that the displacement is permanent. And the hardest thing of all is realizing that this is no one's fault. The people inside the cave are not your enemies. They are not ignorant by choice. They simply inhabit a space that you can no longer inhabit. And you are no better than them for having left. You just saw something they didn't see. And that doesn't make you wise. It makes you lonely. Because wisdom, if there is any in all this, comes at a price that no one warns you about in advance. The price is the impossibility of returning. The price is permanent lucidity. The price is realizing that everything that was once simple is now complex. That everything that was once comfortable is now questionable. That everything that was once enough now seems insufficient. And there's no undoing it. There's no red pill and blue pill with a choice after you've already swallowed it. There's no going back to the way things were. Because the way things were depended on not knowing. And now you know. And knowing has changed the way you see everything, including yourself. So you learn to live with it, or try to learn. Because the alternative, pretending you didn't see it, forcing yourself back into the shadows, stifling your expanded consciousness, that alternative is worse than loneliness. That alternative is losing yourself. And at this point, you've already lost enough people. You've already lost belonging. You've already lost ease. Losing yourself would be losing the only thing left on the other side of this crossing. So you stay on the outside, where the light is bright but company is rare, where the truth is more complex but the price is isolation, where you finally understand what Plato was trying to say so many centuries ago, that seeing is not winning. It is losing the possibility of not seeing, and that never goes away. There is a kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. It has to do with being surrounded by people and realizing that no word you say reaches the place you would like it to reach, not because people are not listening, but because you are no longer talking about the same reality. You're at a table. Someone is excited about a professional achievement. You listen. You understand the words. You understand what this achievement means within the value system that everyone shares. Success, recognition, financial security. And you try to connect. You try to feel the same excitement. But there's a silent voice inside you asking questions that can't be asked out loud. And then what? After this achievement, what really changes? After the recognition, does the inner emptiness diminish? After financial security, does the feeling of living a meaningful life finally arrive? You don't ask these questions because you know they don't fit in that space, that they would sound like judgment, as if you were diminishing someone's genuine joy. So you smile, you congratulate them, you play the role of someone who shares that joy. But inside there is an abyss, a space of incommunicability so deep that it physically hurts. And the worst part is that it's not cruel pretense. You really want to connect. You really want to feel that those conversations make sense, but they don't. Not the way they used to, because now you see the layers underneath. You see that achievement is measured by metrics that someone invented. That recognition comes from a system that has never been questioned. That security is built on foundations that can crumble at any moment, and often do. This isn't cynicism. It's not pessimism. It's just seeing. Seeing that there is a complexity that doesn't fit into automatic conversations. Seeing that people are celebrating shadows on the wall, and you can no longer fail to notice that they are shadows. So you try. You try to bring an extra layer of depth to the conversation. You try to suggest delicately that perhaps there is something beyond that achievement that is worth exploring. Something about meaning, something about purpose, something about what really matters when we peel away the layers of social conditioning. And the response usually comes in two forms. Either people quickly change the subject, uncomfortable with the direction the conversation has taken, or they look at you with a mixture of confusion and concern, as if you were complicating something that should be simple, as if you were being too intense, too deep, too philosophical. And that's never a compliment, because for those who are still looking at the shadows, questioning the shadows makes no sense. It's like questioning reality itself. It's destabilizing, it's threatening. And the natural reaction is to walk away, to protect the belief system that sustains the feeling that life is under control, that choices make sense, that the path they are following is the right one. And you understand. You understand because you've been there. You've lived in a space where the shadows were enough, where there was no need to question because everything already had a ready answer, where life was simpler, lighter, easier to navigate. You don't judge those who are still there, but you can no longer be there with them either. And that creates a distance that is impossible to name in everyday conversations. A distance that does not appear in gestures, polite words, or cordial smiles. But it is there, always. A silent abyss between perceptions that no longer meet. You learn to measure yourself. You learn to talk only about the shadows when you are among those who only know shadows. You learn to put aside the part of you that sees beyond, to keep it in an inner space that is never shared. You learn to have two vocabularies, one for inside the cave, another for outside. And in this process, you fragment yourself. A part of you is always hidden, always silenced, always repressed. And this is not wearing a mask for manipulation. It is wearing a mask for social survival. Because you have learned the hard way that the complete version of you does not fit in most spaces, that the depth of your perception is frightening, that the questions you carry have no place in conversations about traffic, weather, work, and weekend plans. So you split yourself in two. And in that division, the loneliness deepens. Because now it's not just that you're displaced externally, it's that you're displaced internally. A part of you is always performing, always translating, always reducing the complexity of what you see to fit into the space of what can be said. And there are moments when you get tired, moments when the desire to be truly understood, to speak from the deepest place without having to explain or justify or measure, that desire becomes almost unbearable. You want to shout, "There is more." There is a dimension of reality that does not fit into these categories. And I'm not crazy for seeing it, but you don't scream, because you know that would only confirm what many already suspect, that you're complicating life unnecessarily, that you should just relax, enjoy more, stop thinking so much, as if thinking were a choice, as if expanded consciousness came with an off switch. And perhaps the most painful part of it all is realizing that the people around you are not your enemies. They are not trying to exclude you. They are not being superficial out of malice. They simply inhabit a different cognitive space. And you cannot bring them into your space with words alone, because the words you share were created to describe shadows, and you are trying to describe light. It's like trying to explain color to someone who was born blind. No matter how hard you try, no matter how many metaphors you use, the experience is not translatable. Perception is not transferable. And in the end, you are alone with what you have seen, alone with what you know, alone with the impossibility of sharing the most important thing that exists within you. And it doesn't get better with time. It doesn't get easier. You just learn to live with it. You learn that isolation is not the absence of people, but the absence of resonance. You learn that you can be in a room full of people and still be completely alone. Not because no one loves you, not because you're inadequate, but because you see something they don't see. And that something has changed the frequency at which you operate. And now you're tuned into a station that almost no one else listens to. And when you find someone who listens to the same station, the connection is so deep, so immediate, so rare, that you realize how much you've been living in silence, how much you've been holding back, how much you've been translating and reducing and hiding just to fit in. But these encounters are rare, so rare that you can't build a life around them. So you learn to inhabit solitude, to make it not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be accepted. Because the alternative, forcing yourself back into the language of shadows, suffocating the part of you that sees beyond, that alternative is not life, it is erasure. And you've already given up a lot. You've left behind innocence, ease, automatic belonging. But you won't give up on yourself. You won't betray what you've seen just to fit into conversations that can't contain the truth you carry. So you learn the language of silence, the language of those who see but cannot speak, the language of those who know but cannot share. And in that silent language, you find a strange form of dignity, because at least you're not lying. At least you're not pretending that the shadows are everything. And if that means being alone, so be it. At least you are being true. There comes a time when the pressure becomes unbearable. The pressure to return, to fit in, to stop complicating things, to be as you were before, lighter, easier, more comfortable to have around. And this pressure does not necessarily come from a malicious place. It comes from the discomfort your presence awakens in others. Because when you can no longer pretend that shadows are enough, your mere existence becomes a mirror that reflects the frightening, inconvenient possibility that there may be something beyond what they are looking at. And no one likes mirrors that reveal what they don't want to see. So the suggestions begin. Subtle at first. You're thinking too much. You should go out more, distract yourself. You're getting too serious, too closed off. And behind these phrases there is an implicit request. Go back to being who you were. Go back to not questioning. Go back to participating in conversations as if they were enough. Go back to being comfortable. And you feel the temptation. Because the alternative, to remain alone, to remain out of place, to continue carrying a consciousness that no one around you seems to share, is exhausting. It's painful. It's sometimes almost unbearable. So you think, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm overcomplicating things. Maybe I should just stop seeing, stop questioning, stop carrying this weight. And you try. Again. You try once more to force yourself to fit in. You try to laugh at jokes you don't find funny. You try to get excited about topics that don't spark anything inside you. You try to pretend that the depth you saw doesn't exist, that it was just a phase, that now you're back to normal. But something inside you is screaming, not with words, with a physical, visceral feeling that you are betraying yourself. That every time you pretend, every time you reduce what you know to fit what can be said, you are erasing an essential part of who you are. And this erasure is not neutral. It is internal violence. It is suffocating the consciousness that has expanded. It is deliberately closing your eyes to the light you have seen. And in that moment, you understand something that Nietzsche realized more than a century ago. He called it the loneliness of the free spirit. He saw that there are people who, once they have awakened to certain truths, can no longer live as if those truths did not exist. And these people are condemned to a specific form of isolation. Not because they are superior, but because they refuse to lower their perception to fit into spaces that demand unconsciousness as the price of entry. Nietzsche wrote that the free spirit pays a very high price for its freedom. It pays with the loss of belonging, with the loss of social approval, with the loss of the ease of simply existing without questioning. And he did not romanticize this. He did not say it was beautiful or noble. He said it was lonely, brutally lonely. But that the alternative, submitting again to the chains, pretending that the cave is everything, that alternative is worse than loneliness. Because submitting is not returning. It is dying inside. It is killing the part of you that saw. And that part, once dead, does not come back to life. You can pretend for years. You can build an entire life around that pretense. But you will always know that there is something inside you that has been suffocated. Something true that has been sacrificed in the name of acceptance. And that knowledge will silently corrode you. Then you come to a crossroads. And it's not dramatic. It's not an epic moment of decision. It's a quiet, internal moment where you realize you have to choose. Either you protect the consciousness that has awakened, accepting the isolation that comes with it, or you suffocate it, accepting the comfortable life that comes with unconsciousness. And most people choose the second option, not out of weakness, not out of cowardice, but because the first option is terrifying. Because accepting isolation means accepting that you may go years without finding someone who resonates with what you see. It means accepting that you may grow old carrying alone the weight of a perception that no one around you validates. It means accepting that you won't have an easy social life, automatic belonging, the comforting feeling of being aligned with the group. And who can blame someone for not wanting that? Who can judge someone who decides that the price is too high? But if you've come this far, If you're listening to these words and recognizing the emotional structure they carry, then you already know which choice you're going to make, because you've already tried to go back, you've tried to pretend, and you've realized that the price of belonging, when belonging means erasing yourself, is higher than the price of loneliness. And here, I need to speak to you from a different place for a moment. If you're feeling this, if you're recognizing this loneliness as your own, I want you to know one thing. You're not wrong. You're not sick. You're not complicating your life unnecessarily. You're just seeing something that most people don't see. And that's not a defect. It's a consequence of expanded consciousness. And if you're in this place, maybe it makes sense to subscribe to the channel. Not because I'm going to solve this for you. I won't. No one will. But because here in this space, we don't pretend that shadows are everything. We don't simplify what is complex. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find a little of what you've been missing. Not belonging, but resonance. Not a solution, but recognition. Watch the next videos on the channel and maybe you'll realize that even in solitude, you're not completely alone. Because the choice you're making, not to stifle what you've seen, not to go back to the cave just because it's more comfortable, that choice has a cost. But it also has dignity. The dignity of being true to yourself. The dignity of not betraying your own conscience for external acceptance. And maybe that's not enough. Maybe you still feel the emptiness, the displacement, the pain of isolation. But at least you're not living a lie. At least you're not erasing yourself. And in the end, when you look back, you will know that you lived according to what you saw, not according to what you were asked to see. And that, in a world where most people live according to what they have been told, is a silent form of courage. There is an essential difference that needs to be understood. The loneliness of those who awaken is not the same as pathological isolation. It is not depression. It is not social phobia. It is not an inability to connect. It is another category. It is the loneliness that comes from having seen something that cannot be shared with those who have not seen it. And this distinction matters, because if you confuse the two, you will spend years trying to cure yourself of something that is not a disease. You will seek therapy for a problem that is not psychological. You will try to force yourself to fit into spaces that simply no longer accommodate who you have become. And that will only deepen the pain. Pathological isolation distances a person from themselves and others. Conscious solitude distances a person from others but brings them closer to themselves. One is fragmentation. The other is uncomfortable integration. One is escape. The other is an inevitable encounter with a truth that no one else is looking at. And it's not a matter of choice. No one wakes up one day and decides, today I'm going to become lonely through expanded consciousness. It happens as a consequence of asking questions that have no turning back. A consequence of seeing layers of reality that most will never see. Not because they are less capable, but because they simply haven't reached that fissure, and maybe they never will. And here's a truth that may sound arrogant, but it's not. Few people get here. Not because you're special, not because you're smarter or more sensitive, but because most people have psychological defense mechanisms that prevent the crack from growing. They feel the initial discomfort, the inconvenient question, the questioning that threatens their foundations, and instinctively pull away. They return to comfortable narratives. They close the cave door before seeing what's on the other side. And that's not weakness. It's survival. It's how the human mind protects itself from truths that can destabilize the entire belief system built up over years. Because seeing beyond the shadows is not liberating in the comfortable sense. It is destabilizing. It is scary. It is the dissolution of everything that seems solid. So most people don't see. And they won't see. And that creates a permanent asymmetry. You saw. They didn't. And there is no possible bridge between these two realities that can be built with words alone. Experience is not transferable. Perception cannot be taught. It can only be lived. And that means that loneliness is not temporary. It is not something that will pass when you find your tribe or when you learn to communicate better. The loneliness of expanded consciousness is structural. It is part of the condition of having seen. And it can diminish. It can be softened by rare encounters with others who have also seen, but it never completely disappears. And there is something profound in Buddhist philosophy that illuminates this. In Buddhism, there is an understanding that seeing the transitory nature of reality, seeing the suffering inherent in conditioned existence, seeing the illusion of the solid self, all of this brings lucidity. But lucidity is not happiness. Lucidity is clarity. And clarity often hurts, because when you see that everything is impermanent, relationships, identities, achievements, certainties, you can no longer invest in these things in the same way that people around you invest. You can no longer believe that the next promotion will fulfill you, that the next relationship will fill the void, that the next achievement will give you the feeling that you have finally arrived somewhere. You know it won't, because you've seen the pattern. You've seen that nothing external fills the void, that nothing built on transitory foundations brings true stability. And that's not pessimism, it's just seeing. Seeing the structure, seeing the mechanism, seeing that everyone is chasing shadows, thinking that if they catch the right shadow, they will finally feel complete. But you can no longer participate in this pursuit, not honestly. And that puts you in a strange place, because you're not depressed. You're not lacking energy. You haven't lost interest in life. You've just lost interest in the narratives that sustain most lives. And that makes you seem out of place, uninterested, distant. But it's not emotional distance, it's cognitive distance. It's operating on a different frequency. And when you're on a different frequency, superficial connections no longer work. Automatic conversations don't fulfill you. Social rituals don't comfort you. You need something denser, more real, more profound. And that something is rare. So rare that you can go months, years without finding it. And in the meantime, you're alone. Not by choice, not by failure, but because there simply aren't enough people operating on that same frequency around you. And that doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean you should force yourself to return to more common frequencies. It just means you're paying the price of consciousness. And the price is this: isolation. Not absolute, not permanent at all times, but present, always present, like a shadow that follows you even in rooms full of people. And perhaps the most important thing you can understand about this is, you are not alone because you are inadequate. You are alone because you have seen something that few see. And that is not a defect. It is a marker that you have crossed the line, that you have left the cave, that you can no longer live as if the shadows were everything. And in that recognition, there is a strange form of consolation. Not the consolation that loneliness will go away, but the consolation that it makes sense, that it is not random, that it is the consequence of something real, something profound, something that deserves to be honored, even if it hurts. Because what you have seen few see, and carrying that vision has a cost. But it also has a truth that cannot be denied. And in the end, you prefer the lonely truth to the comfortable lie, even if it means walking alone most of the time. There is a moment you never forget, the moment when you are in a conversation, perhaps casual, perhaps by chance, and someone says something that shouldn't be possible, something you thought only you saw, something you had carried in silence for so long that you had accepted it would never be shared. And suddenly there it is, in someone else's words, not perfectly articulated, not necessarily with the same words you would use, but the structure is there, the insight is there, the crack is there, and you recognize with an almost physical clarity that this person has also left the cave. No explanation is needed, no context is needed, you just know. It's as if there were an invisible language, a code that only those who have gone through the same rupture can decipher. And in that moment, something inside you that had been contracted for so long finally relaxes, because you are no longer translating. You are no longer reducing. You are no longer hiding the depth of what you see to fit into superficial conversations. You can talk, really talk, about the layers, about the impossibility of going back, about the loneliness of seeing something that no one else sees. And there is no judgment. There is no strangeness. There is no look of concern that you have become accustomed to receiving when you try to explain these things to those who are still inside the cave. And what you realize in these rare encounters is that the loneliness of awakening is not absolute. It is predominant. It is structural, but it is not total, because there are others. Few, but they exist. People who have also asked questions that have no turning back, who have also seen the light and can no longer pretend that only shadows exist, who also pay the price for this expanded consciousness. And these encounters change something. They don't eliminate loneliness. They don't solve the displacement. But they prove that you are not the only one, that you are not crazy, that the perception you carry, however isolating it may be, is real, it is valid, and it is shared by some people, few but real. The problem is that these encounters don't happen often, and they cannot be forced. You can't go out looking for your tribe as if it were a demographic category, because it doesn't work that way. It's not about sharing superficial interests. It's not about liking the same things or having the same hobbies. It's about having gone through the same cognitive rupture. And that doesn't advertise itself. It doesn't sell itself. It can't be found in apps or thematic groups. It happens by chance, in unexpected conversations, at times when you weren't looking. And when it happens, there's instant recognition, because those who have left the cave recognize those who have left the cave, not by the topics they discuss, but by the way they discuss them, by the density they tolerate, by the complexity they don't avoid, by the honesty they don't soften. And in these encounters, you realize something about quality versus quantity. You can spend years having hundreds of superficial interactions that don't touch on anything deep. Or you can have a single 3-hour conversation with someone who resonates on the same frequency, and that conversation will sustain you for months. It will remind you that you are not alone, that the perception you carry is not delusion, that there is, even if rare, possible resonance. And that changes the way you understand loneliness. Because you realize that you're not looking for belonging in the conventional sense. You're not looking for a large group where you fit in perfectly. You're looking for recognition, for resonance, for a few people who speak the language you learned when you left the cave, the language that isn't taught, only lived. And these people exist, not in large numbers, not everywhere, but they exist. Some are asking the same questions you are. Some have already gone through the same stages of grief, displacement, and acceptance. Some are a few steps ahead, some are a few steps behind, but they all bear the mark of those who have seen. And when you meet these people, something changes. Not in the loneliness. It is still there because the structure of your perception does not change, but in the way you inhabit that loneliness. Because now you know that you are not completely alone, that there are others navigating the same isolation, and that these others, when they appear, make the journey a little less lonely. But there is a paradox here, and it is important to understand it. Even when you meet these people, even when there is deep resonance, the loneliness does not disappear. Because the loneliness of expanded consciousness is not just about lack of company. It is about carrying a perception that does not fit in most spaces. And even among those who have also left the cave, each carries their own version of the light they have seen. Each has their own questions, their own ruptures, their own truths that cannot be unlearned. So resonance exists, but it is partial. It is momentary. It is enough to remind you that you are not crazy, but not enough to eliminate the fundamental isolation of being a conscious individual in a world of automatic narratives. And maybe that's what Plato was trying to say when he ended the allegory of the cave. He didn't end with the freed prisoner finding other freed prisoners and living happily ever after outside the cave. He ended with the prisoner returning to the cave, trying to free the others and being ridiculed, being considered crazy, being in some cases killed for trying to show what he saw. And that's brutal, but it's honest. Because the truth is that most people don't want to be freed. Most are comfortable in their chains. And even among the few who leave, each one leaves alone. Each one sees the light with their own eyes. And each one has to learn to live with what they've seen, with or without company. But encounters matter, even if they are rare, even if they are momentary, because they prove that you are not alone, that the perception you carry is not an aberration, that there are others who also pay the price of consciousness, and that these others, when they appear, will recognize you, not because you explained it, but because you speak the same invisible language. And that doesn't solve everything. It doesn't eliminate loneliness. It doesn't make life easy, but it makes life possible, because you are not completely alone. You are just rare. And there is a huge difference between being alone because you are inadequate and being alone because you are rare. One is rejection. The other is a consequence of consciousness. And knowing the difference changes everything. Because now you know others exist. They are few, they are hard to find, but they exist. And when you find one, even if it's for a few hours, even if it's just once, you will feel what it means not to be translating, not to be reducing, not to be hiding. You will feel what it means to be seen, really seen, by someone who also sees. And that, even though it's rare, is enough to remind you why it was worth leaving the cave, even if the price is high, even if the loneliness is structural, even if most people will never understand. Because the alternative, going back into the shadows, pretending you didn't see, stifling your conscience for easy belonging, that alternative would be to lose yourself. And at this point in the journey, you already know that you prefer conscious loneliness to accompanied unconsciousness. Because at least in solitude, you are still you. And that, in the end, is non-negotiable. There is one final truth that needs to be said. And it is not comfortable. It is not motivational. It will not make you feel that it was all worth it in a way that fills you with euphoria. But it is true. And the truth at this point is the only territory that still makes sense to inhabit. The truth is this: loneliness will not go away. The perception will not diminish. The displacement will not resolve itself. You will not wake up one day and discover that you finally fit in, that you finally found the place where everything makes sense, that you finally returned to the comfort of living without questioning. That will not happen, because you left the cave. And there is no going back. There is no way to unsee what has been seen. There is no way to unlearn what has been learned. And to try to force that return would be to betray something so fundamental within you that it would be equivalent to losing yourself completely. So what remains? What comes after accepting that loneliness is structural, that displacement is permanent, that most will never understand? What remains is to live with it, not despite it, but with it. Integrating it as part of your identity, as a condition of your existence, as the price of the consciousness you carry. And something strange happens when you stop fighting it, when you stop trying to fit in, when you stop hoping that the loneliness will go away, when you simply accept that this is how you exist now, awake, conscious, seeing beyond the shadows. It's not peace, it's not happiness in the conventional sense, but it's something close to dignity. The dignity of living according to what you see, of not lying to yourself, of not stifling the truth for external acceptance, of inhabiting your own consciousness with honesty, even if that means inhabiting it alone most of the time. And there is freedom in that. Not the freedom promised by motivational books, not the freedom to do what you want or be who you are in empty phrases, but the freedom to no longer have to pretend, to no longer have to force yourself to fit into spaces that don't suit you, to no longer have to reduce the complexity of what you see so as not to upset those who don't want to see it. This freedom comes at a cost. You already know what it is: isolation, displacement, superficial conversations that don't fulfill you, parties where you are present but absent, relationships that don't touch the depth you carry. But there is also a truth that underpins all of this. The truth that you are no longer living on autopilot. You are no longer following narratives you haven't questioned. You are no longer measuring your life by metrics that someone else invented and you simply accepted. For the first time, you are living according to your own perception. And that does not guarantee happiness. It does not guarantee comfort. It does not guarantee that you will feel complete or fulfilled in the sense that culture promises. But it guarantees something rarer: authenticity. The feeling that you are not betraying yourself, that you are being true to what you have seen, even if the price is high. And maybe that's the most anyone can achieve. Not the perfect life, not the constant connection, not the easy belonging, but the honest life. The life that doesn't pretend, the life that doesn't hide, the life that accepts loneliness as the price of consciousness and still chooses consciousness. Because the alternative, going back to the shadows, to the automatic narratives, to the comfort of unconsciousness, that alternative no longer exists. Not honestly, not without losing yourself. And you've already lost a lot on this journey. You're not going to lose yourself too, so you keep going. Not because you hope it will get better, not because you believe that one day the loneliness will disappear, but because it's the only option left that still has dignity. It's the only way to live that doesn't betray what you've seen. And in the rare moments when you meet someone who has also seen, you will feel what it means not to be alone, even if it is momentary, even if it doesn't last. Those moments will sustain you. They will remind you that you are not crazy, that the perception you carry is real, valid, and shared by some, few, but real. And in the long moments when you are alone, and they will be long, they will be frequent, you will learn to inhabit your own company. You will learn that loneliness is not emptiness but space. Space to think without interference. Space to see without filters. Space to exist without having to perform for anyone. And that is no small thing. That is not defeat. It is in fact the only possible victory in a world that constantly asks you to be less than you are. The victory of continuing to be, of continuing to see, of continuing to question, even when it means being alone. Because Plato was right. Those who leave the cave do not return the same. They do not return comfortable. They do not return accepted. But they return seeing. And seeing, even if it hurts, even if it isolates, is preferable to not seeing. Because you can live in comfortable lies or in lonely truth. But you can't live in both. And at this point in your journey, you've already made your choice. Maybe not consciously. Maybe without realizing it. But you did. You chose to see. And now you'll have to live with the consequences of that. With loneliness, with displacement, with the impossibility of going back. But you will also live with the truth, with clarity, with the awareness that you are no longer trapped in the shadows. And that even at the cost of everything is freedom. The freedom that no one asked for, but once achieved, no one can give back. So let me ask you something. Now that you've seen this, now that you've recognized this structure, this loneliness, this displacement, would you go back? If you could press a button and unsee everything, go back to the shadows, go back to the comfort of unconsciousness, would you go back? Think about it. And then tell me in the comments. It doesn't have to be profound. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It just has to be honest. Would you go back? Watch the next videos on the channel, count on me, and follow the white rabbit.